Hi, John. How are you today?
Doing great.
John, tell me how long you guys have been on the field, about your family, and what's your ministry goal?
Well, I've been on the field since June 21st. We came to Brazil, and we've been living here for about 5 months. And our ministry goal is discipleship and church planting.
And you have a wife, Hannah, and children?
I have a wife, Hannah, and then I have 3 daughters, Bethany, Eliza, and Ada. And they are 2 years old, 1 year old, and just born. One of ours was born while we were language learning here in Brazil.
Okay. And John, why did you, when you were thinking about coming to the field, why did you decide to go the route of having a language helper instead of going to language school?
Well, originally, language school made a lot of sense to me because it was a track that we could run on. I really appreciated the idea that, we would just methodically go through this program, and I thought that was a huge plus. And then our organization sent us to a language training program where we learned how important it was to learn the language in context. And I think because of that, because of that encouragement, we were given a program that we could use. We still had that track to run on, and yet at the same time, we had the training that we needed to learn language without, fearing that we're going to chase all kinds of rabbits.
And so you had some developed plans or some developed modules. I know that you told me about that you could go ahead and start using with a language helper. So you did have a plan of how.
That's right.
How to use a language helper.
That's right. Yep.
And so can you describe your language helper, and how did you find her?
Well, we were really blessed. We had missionaries on the field already, and they have connections here, and it was actually their daughter that recommended her to us. She's a widow, older lady who has time on her hands and is very articulate, very clear, speaks simply and to the point. She's well-mannered. She's got well-educated. And so, all of those were important factors in choosing a language helper. And she was available. She really was excited to come alongside our family, and she's a Christian. Come alongside our family and help missionary family get adjusted to Brazil. So a lot of those factors came into play, and we had kind of gone through a few different options, and it's really a challenging process, and we just had to wait and pray for just the right person. I felt like that was so key, and that has been so key in our language development.
Is she bilingual in English?
No, she speaks only Portuguese. It was funny when we first had our interview with her. We did a kind of a mock lesson, and I remember her telling this missionary daughter, "I don't know how this is going to work. I'm willing to do it, but I don't speak English and they don't speak Portuguese. This is hopeless." And I said, "Oh, I think it'll work." And sure enough, we just took it step by step, day by day, and we learned the language. So that was really, really helpful.
So you've been working with her now about a few months, right? I don't know, 4 months?
We started on August 17th, and we've had to take a lot of days off because of visa and things, but basically 4 months, yeah.
And so how did you decide how much to pay her?
You know, we really just reached out to the person who connected us with her, and she gave us a rate, and we just went with that. You know, we didn't try to invent some rate because we didn't really know what was fair or appropriate.
Okay. And how often do you meet with her?
I meet with her 5 days a week for 4 hours. We began 3 hours for 5 days a week, and we split that time between Hannah and myself. And then as we continued, we gradually were able to up our time to now we have a babysitter who watches the kids, and we're able to do for 4 hours.
And so Hannah, I think you told me Hannah works with her for the first half hour, the first half hour, then she joins you, and then how does that work?
So in the beginning, I did the first half, and then she did the second half, and then after that, she did the first hour, and then we switched. I did childcare, and she did half an hour, and then we worked together for 2.5 hours together. And after that, now we actually do it together all 4 hours.
Okay. So can you tell me what your sessions are like, and maybe some of the kinds of activities that you do with her?
Well, in the beginning, we did a lot of these lap exercises, and basically it was a designed curriculum so that it's learner driven. So that means that the night before we take an hour and we draw pictures of different concepts, different objects, and then we've got like a little map or activity sheet, and we just put a picture on an activity, and we find out what each activity is, what the activity sheet is in the language, and then what those combinations mean. So like a car, and then we would have a church. And so I go to the church in a car, you know, and we would do it in the past tense to begin with. And then as things progressed, we would add tenses, we would add objects, we would add places, and we would just expand our knowledge through these pictures. And that was really helpful because it wasn't so much translation as having a concept that we shared and then taking that concept and learning that. And the fact that it was learner driven was really helpful because we never got out of sync with where we personally were at, but we were able to drive faster or slower depending on where we were at. Also, our language helper didn't have to be organized necessarily or skilled in lesson planning or in teaching, because really we were the teachers and she was inputting the information into us. She did have to be articulate and clear and creative in her explanations of, I remember talking for 4 hours for 2 different days trying to figure out the concept of kindness, and it was very difficult for me.
Yeah, those non-concrete nouns can be a real challenge, right?
Yes.
But that concept's going to be important to you to be able to understand as one of the fruits of the Spirit, for sure.
That's right.
And so you also told me that you've worked with some children's books. How has that worked, working with her with the books?
Well, I suppose, so that was one activity. And some other activities is once we have enough of a vocabulary that we can comprehend some basic words, then we go through, we'll buy children's books and just go through. And there's pictures that illustrate what's being said. And we just learn the form. We learn what's the sense of it is, why things are the way they are. It's, we really try to dig into why things are the way they are.
And just one last question about your activities. And you've also told me that you've worked on pronunciation with her.
Yes. Hmm. One helpful thing was before we came to Brazil, we had 2 weeks of language training, and during that time, they taught us the importance of articulation, where your tongue is in your mouth, how accents are formed, because there's a mismatch of you're trying to force your English box of sounds, 44 sounds. You're trying to force their sounds into your box. And so you've got to learn how to say those new sounds that maybe your mouth isn't accustomed to or doesn't know how to say. It doesn't have the muscles for it even.
Okay, and so it's one of the things you've worked on with her. So maybe you could just, what kind of advice, John, would you give other learners in regards to language helpers?
I would say, some really important things to do is to have a track to run on, to make sure that you have a direction, a clear sense of where you're going. Make sure you have a strong language helper. I've really been blessed to have you, Mary, as a coach. To each week,
Thank you.
You say, no, that's not a good idea. You shouldn't do that. Or, maybe you should move your effort into this area. Maybe, so just to have that perspective from someone who has learned a language, someone who is knowledgeable about these things, who can stand outside and tell you, no, maybe that's not the right direction that you want to go. And also, have you considered this? I think that's very, very helpful. So good training, having someone who can kind of be an authority over you, and then being in the language. I think that's impossible to overstate. Is you have to talk every day in the language, or you won't learn the language. You can't just get an A in the course and expect to be able to speak Portuguese or Spanish or whatever. You have to own it.
Would you say there are some pitfalls of working with a language helper that you might want to warn somebody about, or
Yeah,
for?
we've had two language helpers, and I think one of the pitfalls was our first language helper she knew English, but she didn't know it completely, and so we would talk a lot in English originally, and that was really a distraction from learning Portuguese. I ended up saying, no, that's not how you say this word, or that's not how you say that word, or this is really the concept I'm going for. And we would talk a lot in English, and it was really kind of a waste of time. One of the benefits of having a Portuguese speaker is they don't really care about how it's said in English or what the English is, because they know Portuguese and they're not necessarily seeking to learn English. So someone who knows English. I'd say another thing is making sure that you're the driver, that you don't get pulled around too much in too many different directions, because a lot of people have ideas about what you should and shouldn't do. And you don't want to get, unless they really know, you don't want to just get yanked around into different areas that are going to really not be productive.
I think that's really good advice, and I really appreciate you being willing to be interviewed today. And I think you guys are on a great track and going strong. And thank you so much for this interview.
So happy to do it.
Okay, and is Bethany there? We'll love to see Bethany first. Okay, bye now.
Paul Abel. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye.